Hi, and welcome to the Mum Boss Method podcast. I am going to talk about my HRT journey because a lot of women ask about my HRT journey, and I have talked about it in other podcasts, but I don't think I've actually specifically got one podcast that takes you from start to finish. I think I've just mentioned it in lots of other podcasts. So I thought I'd share a bit more about my journey with HRT. But before I go into all of the details and tell you what happened, how it came about, I want to remind you that my journey is just that, mine. Okay, so what works for me might not work for you, might not be right for you, might not be appropriate for you. HRT and menopause in general is a very, very individual journey. So what I want to share in this podcast is what happened to me. I also want to share that HRT is not the fix-all for everything when it comes to perimenopause and menopause, which in lots of ways is a great piece of information, because not all women can or should take HRT. So what I share with you in this podcast will be appropriate for you, even if you can't or don't want to or haven't yet explored HRT. So please remember when you're listening to this, I'm not a doctor. And I have to say this all the time in my social media because I get so many women messaging me saying, what prescription are you on? What dosage are you on? What combination are you on? What should I do? I'm not here to tell you if HRT is right for you. I'm not here to tell you what doses, what method. I'm here to share my story. So if you are wondering if HRT is right for you, listen to this because I'm going to give you some tips on how you should approach this conversation with your GP. But please do just that. Please go to your GP and speak to them about your symptoms and what you want to try. My vision for you by the end of this podcast is that you're going to feel empowered to take ownership of your body and your treatment in a way that feels good for you. And yeah, that's what I'm here to do. So when I entered perimenopause, I didn't know that that's what was going on. And because I was only 36 at the time, my doctor didn't even mention perimenopause or do a blood test. She immediately prescribed me antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication and referred me for CBT because, to be honest, I didn't even know it was menopause. And what I'd gone to the GP with was, these absolutely erratic mood swings, which I'd never experienced before. Really, really big bouts of very low mood, anxiety, just being really lethargic and fatigued and having no drive to do anything. And so, it's probably quite understandable that she thought that there was something mental health related going on and that she gave me the course of treatment that she did. But if I'm really honest, none of what then followed helped. So the antidepressants didn't really help. The anti-anxiety medication didn't help. In fact, the anti-anxiety medication was given to me to help me sleep as well because I was really suffering with insomnia. And the antidepressants that she put me on actually made me feel worse for quite a while. So, yeah, I definitely didn't feel better. I felt worse. And then I kind of went, through this for a couple of years, tried several different types of antidepressants and different, I had CBT, I got myself a coach, I enrolled in courses, all of these things to try and help myself feel better. I was convinced it was because I had gained weight and that my body didn't look the way it should do, and I was convinced that at points that if I could change my body and I could just lose weight and I could be fit, that would make me feel better. And so I tried all these different diets and things like that, and none of it really worked. But like I said, a couple of things happened that made me realise that something was going on at that time of my life that was different to just, when I say just, I'm not minimising mental health, but that it wasn't, a mental health issue. And these things encouraged me to push harder on getting the right support from my GP. So the first thing that happened was that I went to my GP about some vaginal discharge that I'd noticed, along with pain during sexual intercourse. Both of those things were nothing I had experienced before. So with the discharge, it was very watery. Sometimes I had to change my underwear a few times a day, and I was pretty sure I wasn't leaking urine. I had a C-section when I had Charlie, so it was quite unlikely that I was going to have bladder weakness. So I went to the GP and she examined me and she said that I had a vaginal prolapse. So knowing what I know about female health, I immediately booked in with a female health physiotherapist, because the GP was saying it's not bad enough for surgery. If it gets worse, we might consider you for surgery. But I didn't want to go down that route. I wanted to try and work on my pelvic floor and my internal muscles to fix the problem myself, which I also was really surprised that that's what the doctor said to me, because I was running a lot. I wasn't having any of the problems associated with a vaginal prolapse. So I got to that appointment, and this is a big shout out to Becky Aston, Women's Female Health Physio. She was amazing. I explained the symptoms. She examined me and she said I did indeed have a mild prolapse, but that it was very mild and it was nothing to be worried about. We could do some work on that and it would definitely help. And she said that the discharge I was experiencing was likely down to perimenopause, because when our estrogen levels lower, the walls of the vagina atrophy or become thinner and weaker, and this can cause that watery discharge and pain. So she said that we do our follow-up appointments where she'd give me exercises to help me with my pelvic floor, but also that I should go back to my GP and ask for some vaginal estrogen, which is topical estrogen that you don't ingest, you just insert into your vagina, which I did. So I started that vaginal estrogen. I was still, however, even after a couple of weeks, feeling those dramatic mood swings. I knew that vaginal estrogen would not help the mood swings. I was extremely anxious, and I put that down to social anxiety following the pandemic. I just thought, well, I've been, at home for a year and a half, barely seeing people. I'm just socially anxious now. And I still felt just generally lost in my body. But around that time, Davina McCall's programme about menopause came out. And at the same time, I also reached the hormone section of one of the qualifications that I was doing. And all of a sudden, it really hit me that I wasn't just experiencing some of the first physical signs of perimenopause and age with the vaginal atrophy that I was experiencing, and the emotional, but I was experiencing the emotional and mental symptoms too. But it wasn't just anxiety and depression, it was perimenopause. So I started tracking my symptoms. I created myself a grid. I put it on my desk. I'd tick, I'd write the dates. I'd tick when I was experiencing the symptoms. If they were really bad, I'd put a little red star next to them. And after a couple of months, I went back to my GP and laid out the evidence in front of her. And I asked for HRT. And because I'd done my research, I knew exactly what I wanted to try. And she was really reluctant to give me HRT. She said that it likely wouldn't help because I was too young, because I was only 41 and I wasn't old enough for perimenopause. So, as I said, I'd done my research and I knew exactly what HRT I wanted to try. I opted for estrogen gel because I knew I'd forget to change patches, and I opted for progesterone tablets. And as soon as I picked up that medication, I started it as soon as I could. And then I waited. And I think it's really important at this point to kind of talk about some of the symptoms that I was experiencing, because it wasn't, by this time I realised, there were things going on that I'd perhaps not even linked together, and that maybe I'd been feeling for quite a long time, but just put them down to, well, that's just how I feel. And this is the thing about menopause, and it's so much better now than it was, 6, 7, 8 years ago when I first started experiencing these things. But often women just think that you're perimenopausal when your symptoms stop and you get hot flashes, and that's not symptoms, sorry, when your periods stop and you get hot flashes, and that's just not true. There are thought to be potentially 100 or more than 100 menopause symptoms, and some of them are so bizarre that you just don't even realise how they could be connected. So let's just go through some of the things that I was really experiencing. So I had itchy skin, and when I say itchy skin, I would regularly ask my husband to check my hair for head lice. Regularly get him to check. It was particularly bad at the back of my neck, and I was thinking, well, I exercise, is it from sweat? But it was, I could maybe not go to the gym for a couple of days, my hair would be freshly washed and I would have this itchy skin. But also there were a couple of patches on my legs, that especially my thighs, that just felt like there was an itch deep within my skin, like that I couldn't reach. I also started to get really watery eyes, and I thought, oh, maybe I'm developing hay fever. It didn't quite make sense. Why was I getting these really watery eyes? And I could have a day where my eyes just streamed, and it didn't matter what the weather was. It happened whether I was inside or outside. Insomnia definitely got worse. I've not always been brilliant at sleeping. I would say that I had insomnia from when I got pregnant with Charlie, and I went through a very stressful time in my job, but the insomnia got worse. There were weeks and weeks and weeks where I was getting 3 or 4 hours sleep. I was getting headaches, and these very often turned into migraines. I was extremely fatigued, like so fatigued that I was known to quite often just go and have an afternoon nap. The night sweats were ridiculous. Now, hot flushes are things that are often talked about, but night sweats, I don't really get hot flushes, but I do get and did get night sweats so badly. Low confidence, low motivation. I had so many, and they're just like some of the ones that I'm thinking about now. There were a lot. Now, within 4 weeks of starting the estrogen gel and the progesterone, I did start to feel a little bit better, but not enough to really feel like the HRT was doing enough. It was minimal feeling. And I carried on taking the HRT and logging my symptoms, and after a few months I still didn't feel an impact. But I'd also noticed that because my cycle was so erratic, the progesterone tablets I was taking were becoming a problem, because the instructions of those were to take for the first 14 days of my cycle, but sometimes my cycle was only 14 days long, meaning I was taking it back to back, and sometimes it was 28 days. And then sometimes it was 60 days long. So, sometimes I was taking it back to back and sometimes not for months, and that's not useful. I was also noticing that my sex drive was getting lower and lower and quite honestly the lowest it had ever been, and it was seriously affecting my relationship with my husband. So again, armed with my evidence of my cycle tracking, of my symptoms and the research I'd done, I went back to the doctor and I asked her to increase my estrogen, to find me another solution for the progesterone, and to prescribe me testosterone. So she reluctantly again upped my estrogen dose. She booked me in to have my Rena coil for the progesterone, and she referred me to a menopause specialist in my area for the testosterone, because testosterone is not licensed to be prescribed by a GP for HRT. So it had to be prescribed by a menopause specialist. So I finally got that appointment after a 2-month wait, and I saw the specialist, and I cannot tell you how completely heard and validated I felt in that meeting with him. And it was at that point I was diagnosed with primary ovarian insufficiency, or POI, sometimes also called premature ovarian failure. Now, this is loss of the normal ovarian function before the age of 40. It affects 1 to 4% of women, depending on where in the world you are. It causes low estrogen. It causes infertility due to early follicle depletion. So another part of my story is that we tried to have a second child when I was like 36, 37, and that was a very difficult thing to do, and didn't happen. And the symptoms mimic menopause. So irregular periods, the hot and cold flushes, night sweats, and the symptoms are managed with hormone replacement therapy to reduce the risk of osteoporosis and heart disease, amongst other things. He also gave me the testosterone. And he was told that I likely should have been on HRT from my mid-30s, but, we couldn't go back in time. So there was no point dwelling on that. Let's move forward. I was by this time coming up to 43. And he said, yep, you had POI and now you're likely to be in perimenopause. So let's just get you on a complete regime that includes estrogen, progesterone and testosterone, and come back in 3 months and let's see how you're getting on. I can't tell you how life-changing that appointment was for me. That whole journey took about 18 months, and it was from here on in that I really saw changes to how I felt. I was able to see changes in my body, in my life, in my mindset, in my mental health. And do I still sometimes experience insomnia? Yes, but I can always put it down to times when I am quite stressed or worried about something. Do I sometimes overreact to things and see red rage? Yes, I do. If I'm honest, I probably saw some of those things, some of that before I was suffering like this anyway. Do I sometimes experience some of the perimenopause symptoms that I had? Yes, the eyes can still be really watery. The itching's gone, thank goodness. That was really annoying. Sometimes I still get the night sweats, but on the whole, I am managing my perimenopause so much better. And so I wanted to end this podcast with some things that I really, really want you to take away. And the first one of those is track your symptoms. Now, when I was doing this, there was a couple of online symptom trackers. You could download some sheets that you could just do a tick list on, but there was nothing where everything was in one place, some kind of mood stuff, journaling and symptom trackers. So my recommendation is track your symptoms. My kind of action from that was that I wrote a menopause journal, which you can get on Amazon, and I will put the link to that in the show notes. I created a menopause journal where you can track your symptoms, but you can also journal on how you're feeling and how your day has been, and use it to plan your days and stuff like that, because that's what I wish I had when I started this journey. My second tip is advocate for yourself. If you're not being heard by your doctor, please look up the NICE guidelines for menopause, which will help you to really kind of prep yourself for that meeting with your GP. Something that I experience myself, but I have seen so often with the women that I work with when they are under the age of 45, is that they are just fobbed off and told they are too early, or they're given a blood test, and when that blood test comes back as showing their hormone levels as being normal, they're fobbed off again. And those blood tests are not fail-safe. They can be quite inconclusive because our hormones fluctuate at this time of our life. So if you get a blood test just when you so happen to, be having normal levels of hormones, that blood test is useless. So let's really, really advocate for yourself. If you are refused a blood test, if the blood test comes back as normal, but you really don't feel that it is, then make sure you go back to tracking your symptoms and go back to your GP with the evidence. The third piece, I've talked so much about this in my social media content recently, but the third piece of this is don't underestimate the importance of healthy habits. So another thing that I hear often from women is, if I take HRT, will it help me lose weight? If I take HRT, will it make me gain weight? I want you to not underestimate the importance of your healthy habits for two reasons, okay? If you are concerned with your weight, firstly, how you're eating, how you're moving, how you're sleeping are all really important for weight management. Okay, whether you want to lose weight or you just want to stay the same, all those healthy habits are important, if not more important than the HRT you're taking. And the second piece is that HRT won't stop you gaining weight. HRT won't help you lose weight. There's something really important to know is that it's not estrogen's fault if you gain weight in perimenopause. Okay, it's not the fact that your estrogen lowers that all of a sudden you just hold on to fat at this time of your life. Yes, the symptoms that you might experience in perimenopause can make it harder for you to adhere to your healthy habits. Okay, so for example, if you've got really interrupted sleep and you're, like I was, you're getting 3 or 4 hours sleep a night, that can make eating healthily and doing exercise really, really difficult. So yes, HRT might improve that symptom and therefore make it easier for you to stick to your eating plan and stick to your exercise plan, and therefore either maintain your weight or lose weight if that's your goal. But it's not a direct correlation. It's not, my estrogen's getting lower, therefore I will hold on to the fat from this meal I've just eaten. That's not what happens, okay? So don't underestimate those healthy habits, firstly for weight management, but also and more importantly, just your good health, both physically and mentally, okay? Because you can be taking HRT. And you can, if you aren't eating well, if you're not eating your protein, eating your fruit and veg, drinking your water, exercising regularly, getting steps, getting good sleep, managing your stress, you're still going to feel awful. And that's something that I learned. I've been lifting weights and going to the gym for 16 years now, but that didn't necessarily mean I was eating my healthiest all the time. I've been really open about the lockdown years for me were a mixture of I ran a lot and then I'd get to maybe Thursday and it would become 1 o'clock, like all through the weekend. So you could be taking HRT, but if you're not undertaking those healthy habits, you're not necessarily going to be healthier. Because HRT doesn't replace your healthy habits. And then the fourth piece of this is find support. So, go to your GP, ask to be referred, find a group of people who talk about this. Come and follow me on social media, come and join my free Facebook group. come and join my coaching community, or go and find, there are lots of other Facebook groups or communities out there that are there to support women who are going through peri and postmenopause. Find that support. Advocate for yourself in finding that support when it comes to your GP and medical professionals. And if weight loss in perimenopause, menopause is something you're really struggling with, I will also put the link to my Why Aren't You Losing Weight in Menopause quiz in the show notes. So you can take that, and that will tell you what to focus on. I hope this has been really helpful to you. I'd love it if you could leave a review for the podcast and let me know what you thought of this. I'll be back again next week with a brand new topic. Thank you for listening. Have a great week.